Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. So today's video I'm just going to be doing a quick little update on something that has recently been announced by FFTCG, Square Enix and the Organized Play. So if you guys have not seen the news, basically they've recently announced that two cards have been declared will be banned in the near future. So this is Jesper as well as Fermentor. So these are two cards that have been prevalent in the Mono Ice, Turbo Ice discard strategy for quite some time, and it has been a deck that's been very polarizing in the entire metagame. So Square has recently put up a Facebook post as well as posted up on the official website that as of December 1st, these cards will be banned from all competitive play. So these will not be legal in any sort of standard competitive tournament play. So I guess let's break down this decision, right? So this is the first time that the Final Fantasy TCG in this Opus series has decided to ban any cards from its standard play. So one card previously earlier, Jesse was banned from Title Series. That being said, Title Series was a more fun and casual format, so it wasn't really their premier competitive strategy. But now this is the first two cards that we have seen banned from competitive standard play. So let's first of all look at Fermentor. So the reason why Fermentor was banned is primarily because of its power level, right? So at a 2 CP forward, it forces your opponent to discard a card from her hand. But not only that, it's a combination of a whole bunch of characteristics that makes this card too strong. So, right, 2 CP plays card to force your opponent to discard a card means that you're on parity when you play this card. So both of you sacrifice the same amount of resources. You spend 2 CP, put this card into play, and your opponent discards the card, right? But not only that, this card goes from 1,000 power to 5,000 power when you have your opponent has 2 or less cards in their hand, right? So this is actually a very easy threshold for you to force your opponent into. So this card is going to be perpetually a 5,000 power forward towards the mid game, because you're forcing your opponent down to a low hand size, and you're going to constantly be forcing them down to a low hand size, right? But not only this, its biggest factor is that it is a standard unit, so you could build a strategy where you are able to spam these guys out. So the big issue of this card is that it just had too many attributes that were too good. So it was cheap, it was well cost, it had a good effect that's built into its strategy. It has a bonus for you to achieving a very low threshold, and also having to be a standard unit, which allows you to spam these guys out. So this card just single-handedly forced the Mono Turbo Ice discard strategy into much stronger territories than they thought it would actually be. Now Jesper is a card that is probably banned for an opposite reason, right? So Jesper by itself, its power level isn't significantly high, because fundamentally its usable ability of you and your opponent both discard a card is actually very fair, in that you are technically not netting any sort of resource advantages when you are using its effect. But its strength comes from the situation of when you do it when you don't have any cards in hand, or your opponent doesn't have any cards in hand, the other player still discards, right? Obviously, since you get to choose when you use this, you're only going to use this card when you have no cards in your hand and when your opponent does have cards in their hand, right? So in those situations, it does it's effectively a way to just force your opponent to discard a card from their hand, at the caveat of you not having any cards in your hand at the time as well, right? So this fundamentally isn't too strong, and it's not a strategy that's overbearing. But the reason why Jesper was banned is not because of its power, but it's because it creates a unenjoyable play state, right? So it creates a situation where you just want to get to 0 cards in hand, and you want to force your opponent down to 0 cards in hand as well, right? So it really makes the game unenjoyable, in that both players are just dumping their hands every turn to play 1 or 2 cards, and just have to sit back with no real responses. So Jesper, compared to Fermentor, not banned for its power, but banned because it creates a unenjoyable game state, right? So this card is not fundamentally unfair strategy or unfair mechanic in the game, because if you're playing cards that are balanced and are fair, that usually has some sort of balance or restriction to how of what you're paying to make your opponent discard, right? But the combination of these two effects, and then in combination with the overall Ice archetype that has benefits of when your opponent has 0 cards or have low cards in their hands, when these effects are combined with these effects that are just so good at discarding cards from your opponent's hand, it does create a very powerful strategy. And since fundamentally every strategy is built around you playing cards, that it's just like a hard counter everything, right? The hard counter to playing cards is just make sure your opponent's got no cards, right? And so yeah, that's why these cards were just kind of a little bit too powerful in the meta. And like ever since these cards were released, we have seen them becoming a very dominant force in the metagame, especially in the last Opus metagame, where all strategies either had to be strategies that could deal with it effectively, or were like a Turbo Ice discard, right? So it is one of these strategies that's very polarizing, and it's not fun to play against, and it's like too strong for all the cards for what it does, right? And that's testament to how cheap the deck is. Fundamentally, the deck didn't require any rare or powerful cards. It just required a whole bunch of commons that were just going to like grind out your opponents on resources. So we can understand why these cards were banned, because they were just kind of like too prevalent in the meta, right? Now, I guess like as a second component to this is like why ban them now, right? So what's important to note is that when developers develop cards, they have to test it in the environment of all the existing cards, right? To make sure that cards that they release don't create any sort of like overpowered combination, or overpowered strategies that are just like too good in the current metagame, right? And as more and more cards release, the more cards the designers have to test their new cards in to check that they're not overpowered in the context of their existing play environment. And here's the thing: while Jesper and Fermenturge are always in the game, any card that is like Sid Olstein or any card like Squall is always going to be held back, because there already exists a deck or environment that's just so good at getting your opponent down to like 0 cards in hand, right? Which means that developers just either have to say, cool, we're going to have to like tone back this card, we have to buff everything else up, or any of these cool effects that sort of incentivize you or give you a bonus for when your opponent has a low hand size, we can't produce those cards because they're too good in the Fermenturge Jesper environment, right? And so in order to make the game more enjoyable, like they've decided to just get rid of this factor, right? Which like frees up design space. So in future, if they want to design another card similar to Squall or similar to Sid Olstein, they can do it, and those are great cards, because those are cards that reward you for getting your opponent to a certain game state of having no cards or little cards in hand. But it makes you getting to that stage a little bit more difficult, which was fundamentally the issue, because it was too easy to get to that stage, and so you're collecting these bonuses a little bit too easily. So yeah, so it makes sense for them to get rid of these cards, or to affect these cards, so it's a much more enjoyable play experience, and B, it's a much more balanced game play experience, and also number 3 or C, it just allows the designers to design cards more creatively and more fun cards without being restricted by these two cards that just might make those new enjoyable cards a little bit too overpowered in their like current card environment. So next thing to consider is that this ban is actually going to be implemented on the 1st of December. So it will not affect the upcoming World Championships for the Final Fantasy TCG. So for the 30 of us that will be attending, this does not affect our testing and our strategies or any of our preparations, right? So I guess that is a big thumbs up to Square Enix for just holding the trigger off a little bit to make sure that we wouldn't have any last minute changes that will affect this upcoming tournament metagame. Yeah, like I personally wouldn't have minded it, but I know quite a few people would have disliked the fact that this was such a last minute change about 2.5 weeks out from the event. Yeah, like these sort of like any sort of bans that occur right before a tournament is generally not well liked by the playing community, simply because they would have prepared for these cards or these strategies in advance, and for it to change last minute kind of sucks. But yeah, 1st of December, so it means that for most players and the competitive season, it means that it's not a big issue at all whatsoever. Now, finally, one last thing I kind of want to talk about is the decision to ban these cards as opposed to limit them, or as opposed to errata them. So there are pros and cons to like all these ways to affect cards that might be overpowered in the game. So let's talk about why not errata-ing cards. So in general, erratas should only be, in my opinion, for situations where cards were mistranslated or like the text was incorrectly put down from what the creators originally intended, and it's such a difference from what they originally intended, or the actual usage of it is so clear that the text should just be considered something else, right? So if something were to have like just like a wrong spelling, or a wrong wrong spelling, or a wrong job, or a wrong something or other, then having a errata stating that, oh, this card actually meant all job knights as opposed to all job heights or something like that, right? So little things like that. So erratas, those are what erratas should be restricted to in situations where the text on a card was just completely different to what the designer's intention was, usually because of some sort of like lack of quality control or lack of proofreading, right? So that's why I believe erratas are for. The reason why erratas aren't good for changing cards to be more balanced is that it sets a bad precedent of in the future, especially when new players get into the game or players who aren't so up to date with the social media, they will have to constantly check, oh man, what does Zidane do again? Or what does Fermentage do now? What does Jesper do? Because I can't refer to cards. I have to refer to this website of this huge list of, oh yeah, like I'm not sure what these cards do anymore. Or someone who's just starting into the game, they might open a pack of cards, see this card, and they're like, cool, let's build a strategy around it. They get to a tournament and someone's like, oh yeah, by the way, that card doesn't do what the card says. It actually does what this website says. And like the new player's like, oh, what? I didn't know that there was a website for this shit. Like, and just like halfway through a tournament, they get this sprung up on them, right? So errating is fundamentally not a great experience for players. Now, obviously, digital card games get away with this because you just like fix the card like digitally, so it's as if the card always said this, right? But yeah, with physical card games, erratas are not a good strategy, simply because it sets a bad precedent of new players having to go check this list up of what cards do and being confused that what's physically printed there is not actually on the card, right? Now, fundamentally, this is going to be the same issue with like reading a list online is going to be the same issue as if a card was errated, banned, or limited, right? Because in all situations, you're going to have to refer to some list online that says these cards now do this, or these cards have some sort of deck building restriction to them, right? So if we were to consider limited, this is actually like it also equally solves the problem if Fermentage and Jesper are both down to 1, then yeah, that would also solve the problem of these cards can still exist, but they will not be as impactful on the metagame because the strategy can only have one of each, right? So it does solve the metagame issue, but it becomes very, very difficult to track which cards are limited to 1 or which cards are limited to 2. And so like you have a Yu-Gi-Oh situation where every 6 months you just have to check like a new list of, oh yeah, what's semi-limited, what's limited, and then you have to like figure these things out, right? And when it comes to like deck construction, it becomes a little bit more cumbersome because you kind of have to remember, oh, what's 2 and what's 1, right? Whereas like banning is like it's very simple. It's like it's either a ban or it's not banned, right? You don't have to remember which cards are 2 and which cards are 1. You just have to remember all of these cards are just zeros, right? And I think when they are using the ban list more conservatively, so only using ban cards for only very specific overpowered strategies, it makes it very easy to remember how many ban cards there are because they're only just a couple, right? I do think that how they have gone about this is actually quite conservative, in that these 2 cards had been existing in the metagame for such a long time before they banned it. It's after like extensive viewing and reviewing of tournament results and player experience, they have noticed that this is an issue, and that's why they have banned it. So it's not this isn't one of those organizations or one of those producers of a card game where they just will like knee-jerk ban a card immediately off the bat because people complain about it for 3 weeks, right? So the timing of this is also relevant to it. So yeah, semi-limited, also a solution to ban, but just is a little more cumbersome, and banning it seems to be much more of an easier, elegant solution, especially a long-term solution for this game as well. Now, the one reason why limiting a card might be better than banning a card is if people have spent a lot of money on certain cards, they will feel terrible that their cards go from being high-priced cards to becoming worthless straight away. And that's sort of why you would sometimes limit or semi-limit a card, because you want people to still have or use these cards, because it just feels too much of a kick in the teeth if they spent like the equivalent of 5 packs to buy like a legendary, and then all of a sudden finding out that these cards are worth absolutely 0 now because these cards cannot be played at all. Which in this case is not the case, because Jesper and Fermentage are both common cards. Players fundamentally paid virtually nothing for these cards, and yeah, if they did have to get their free copies, they paid virtually nothing as well, right? So these cards are basically free. Having them banned fundamentally affects no one in a real economic sense, because they're basically worthless. They're basically free. You could get them fundamentally for free anyways. If you go to your local game store and you need a couple copies of a specific uncommon or like a rare or a common, most of the time, if you just let someone know in advance, they'll just bring those commons and they'll give them to you for free, all right? No one's going to charge you 20 cents per comment, right? Stores kind of have to do it just because they're a store, but if you ask someone, I'm pretty sure they'll just give you comments. I've got a box of comments I just give to people, right? So yeah, so in this situation, banning was fair and actually a very optimal outcome of this, because these cards are cheap. It affected the play state in the play environment in such a way that it was quite unenjoyable, and these are cards that were going to affect design space in the future. So overall, this was a very good decision. I'm not looking at it from just a purely like play experience perspective. I'm looking at it from like a more holistic, like larger perspective of the entire like environment of the game and the environment of the player space and environment of competitive format as well. And also looking at the economic factors and also whether people would have liked or disliked this decision that they made. And I think like very few, almost no one is going to object to this banning at all. And I think that this is one of the few situations in card games I've played where there has been a ban, and I think no one minds whatsoever. So yeah, it was just executed perfectly, and it was a decision that everyone can get on board with. So yeah, what are you guys' thoughts about the ban? Yeah, I hope I've highlighted some interesting concepts or some interesting thoughts about this that you guys might not have thought about. Do give your opinions down in the comment section below if you think there's anything I might have missed or any interesting concerns or aspects that I might have glossed over a little bit too much. But until next time, Grand J out.